Towards the latter end of Dr. Carl Gustav Jung's studies into psychology and the unconscious, he began a peculiar fascination with the aspect of alchemy, often speaking of the so-called Vas Hermeticum, or the sealed container of the psyche, and its necessity for transforming our sometimes chaotic and disruptive emotions into psychological gold. For Jung, there was a deep fascination with alchemy. He, in a sense, realized that medieval alchemists weren't just trying to turn lead into gold. They were projecting their own internal and psychological transformations onto chemical processes. But first, let's try to understand Jung's alchemical metaphor by describing some of the primitives in which it encompasses. First is the prima materia, or the raw emotion. In alchemy, the process of transmutation begins with the so-called prima materia, or base metal. Psychologically, this to Jung meant your raw, unprocessed emotional material: anxiety, grief, rage, shame, or neuroses. It is heavy, dark, and deeply uncomfortable. And our modern instinct is to medicate, distract, or banish the base metal as quickly as possible. Jung argued that this material is actually the prerequisite for growth. You cannot make psychological gold without it. In order to make that psychological gold, he turns next to the so-called Vas Hermeticum, or sealed container. To transform the base metal, the alchemist places it inside a Vas Hermeticum, a hermetically sealed vessel or retort. Psychologically, this vessel represents containment. It is the ability to hold a feeling in your conscious awareness without letting it escape. A leaky vessel happens when we act prematurely out of emotions. We feel angry and immediately lash out, or feel sad and immediately numb ourselves with alcohol or doom scrolling. The vessel leaks, the pressure drops, the heat escapes, and the transformation stops. Contrast this then to a so-called sealed vessel. This is the act of sitting with the raw emotion. You observe the pain, feel its physical presence in your body, and refuse to act on it, repress it, or project it onto someone else. The sitting vary with the presence of the burning heat of your own emotion, which leads then to the fire and the heat, or the tension of opposites, according to Jung. Once the emotion is contained, you must apply the fire. The fire is the friction of the emotional experience itself. When you hold two conflicting things at once, for example, I love this person, and yet I am furiously angry at them, or I am terrified, yet I must stay here, you create what Jung calls the tension of opposites. This tension generates intense psychological heat. It feels like you're burning up inside because the ego is suffering under the weight of the paradox. This is exactly why it is so difficult to sit with uncomfortable emotions. The fire is designed to break down your old, rigid ways of being, a phase the alchemists called negrido, or the blackening. And finally comes the state of transmutation, or psychological gold. If we can withstand the heat for a long enough time without breaking the seal of the vessel, something remarkable happens, what Jung called the transcendental function. The intense heat eventually breaks down the raw, painful emotion and synthesizes it into a completely new state of consciousness. The emotion is converted. Rage converts into a profound clarity and boundary setting. Paralyzing grief might convert into a deep, grounded empathy. The suffering is transmuted into a philosopher's stone of sorts, which in Jungian terms is a form of individuation or realization of the whole integrated self. Think of it like this. The vase is your conscious mind, your capacity to hold experience, and the fire is your intense discomfort of raw emotions. By trapping the emotion in the vase and letting it burn, the suffering eventually exhausts its destructive form and converts into wisdom, resilience, and psychological wholeness. Jung found this alchemical metaphor to be intensely valuable as a means to explain what he often witnessed in his patients, noting also that the therapeutic relationship itself to be a form of hermetic seal, under which complex and difficult emotions could be sat with in order to go through the process of transmutation. Hence, a therapeutic relationship can be tremendously valuable. But let's turn to the very aspect of the hermetically sealed vase and the importance of sealing that vase. In Jungian psychology, the hermetic seal is what prevents your emotional energy from evaporating. Imagine it like this. If you boil water in an open pot, the heat simply evaporates into air. The water is gone, the heat is wasted, and nothing changes. But if you seal that pot and apply the same heat, you create pressure. That pressurized steam generates immense power, enough to drive an engine. So if we create this conscious boundary where we can convert the pain of raw emotion, we can apply that immense pressure to build a transformative level of change in ourselves. But this is also where we tend to run into trouble, because the biological urge within us wants to break the seal. Our brains are wired for survival, which means we are biologically programmed to avoid pain and seek homeostasis. When we are uncomfortable with an emotion like deep shame or existential dread, blinding anger, our ego panics. It views the internal pressure as a threat and immediately looks for a release valve to let the steam out and lower the temperature. Breaking the seal is an action that you take to immediately discharge the tension rather than feeling it. We can try to puncture the vessel through projection, blaming others, projecting outwards, seeking fault in society, a partner, or our boss. We can puncture the vessel through acting out in distraction. We discharge energy through our behavior. When we send an angry text at 2 a.m. or impulsively quit a job or numb ourselves with alcohol, overeating, or mindless scrolling. We break the vessel when we seek premature resolution. A subtle but common leak. The discomfort of uncertainty is so high that we rush to make a decision, any decision, just to end the suspense. We apologize when we shouldn't, or we force false compromise, killing the tension before the genuine solution can arise. But the seal actually provides a third way. Jung observed that when you successfully seal the vessel and refuse all of these easy escape routes, you force your psyche into a corner. You hold the tension of opposites, and because you refuse to break the seal by either fleeing impulsively or repressing your unhappiness, the conscious ego suffers under the pressure, and it literally does not know what to do. At this exact moment is when the magic happens. The conscious mind is trapped and exhausted from the heat of the paradox, and the unconscious mind, according to Jung, steps in. Because the energy cannot escape outward, it is forced to move inward and downward. The pressure forces the psyche to generate a completely new perspective or solution that the ego could have never invented on its own. Jung called this the so-called transcendental function. And it is through this process which Jung believed we could convert psychological prima materia into psychological gold.